I've always believed that love and care can manifest in countless forms, even if society sometimes fails to understand or fully embrace them. My father-in-law, Bernard, was a prime example of this truth. He didn't fit the image of the dominant or intimidating patriarch that one might expect from stories passed down through the generations. Rather, he was a man whose gentle demeanor and quiet confidence spoke volumes. His eyes, filled with the kind of wisdom and compassion that only time can cultivate, seemed to carry a deep understanding of the world around him. Though he didn't raise his voice or make grand gestures, his presence was undeniably commanding. It drew people in, inviting them to feel at ease without the need for any elaborate displays. I first had the honor of meeting Bernard during a family dinner, shortly after I started dating his son, John. Naturally, I was nervous. Meeting the parent of someone you care about is always an anxious experience, and I braced myself for the polite but often distant interaction that is so typical in these situations. But Bernard quickly put me at ease. From the very first moment he greeted me, there was an unmistakable warmth in his manner, a kind of openness that made me feel instantly welcome, like I had been part of the family for years. His handshake was firm but warm, a gesture that spoke of both strength and kindness. His smile was genuine, carrying a sincerity that was rare to find. Unlike many who might ask probing questions or make awkward small talk to fill the silence, Bernard took a different approach. He showed a true, heartfelt interest in me. He asked about my passions, my family, my dreams, questions that encouraged me to open up and share more about myself. His voice, steady and calming, reminded me of the comforting hum of an old, familiar song, something that reassured you, no matter how unsettled you might feel. Throughout the evening, it became clear to me that Bernard had a rare gift, the ability to make everyone around him feel valued, as though they were the most important person in the room. It was an ability I admired deeply. What truly struck me, however, was not just the way Bernard treated me but how he interacted with everyone at the table. He wasn't just the head of the family, he was its heart. He was the anchor that kept everyone grounded, effortlessly making each person feel heard and appreciated. By the end of that night, I understood why John spoke of his father with such admiration and reverence. Bernard wasn't simply a man of words, he was a man of action. He showed his love not through grand gestures but through consistent, quiet acts of kindness. He made you feel seen and valued without ever demanding anything in return. Looking back now, I realized that meeting Bernard marked the beginning of something much larger than I had initially understood, not just in terms of my relationship with John, but in terms of my own journey toward understanding what it truly means to belong to a family. Bernard's life was like a vast, open book, filled with stories that span decades. He often shared tales from his early days working on farms in rural France, where the land seemed to stretch on forever, and the work was both demanding and rewarding. Those early experiences shaped his character, teaching him the virtues of patience, resilience, and the rewards of hard work. However, Bernard was never one to stay rooted in one place for too long. He possessed a bold, adventurous spirit that eventually led him to leave everything he knew behind and start anew in the United States. There, he worked tirelessly to build a small business. It wasn't a lavish enterprise, no flashy cars or luxurious homes, but it was his own, and he poured his heart and soul into it. He didn't accumulate wealth in the conventional sense, but the true riches of his life lay in the profound impact he had on the people around him, in the way he quietly shaped the lives of those who were lucky enough to know him. Over the years, Bernard became much more than just a father-in-law to me. He became a mentor, a friend, and a source of solace during times of hardship. His wife had passed away a decade before I met him, leaving a void in his life that he filled with his work, his garden, and, most importantly, his grandchildren. Despite this, there was always a trace of loneliness in his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the passage of time and its inevitable effects. As my relationship with John grew stronger, we made the decision to marry. We kept our wedding simple, choosing to hold the ceremony in Bernard's backyard, surrounded by the roses he had so lovingly cultivated. Each flower in the garden seemed to reflect Bernard's own life, A life full of care, patience, and a deep sense of commitment. It was a perfect setting, one that held within it all the love, warmth, and dedication that Bernard had poured into his family over the years. After the wedding, life moved forward, as it always does. John and I settled into a new rhythm, building a life together. But as the months passed, I began to notice subtle changes in Bernard. His once steady health began to decline. Arthritis took a toll on his body, making even the simplest of tasks painful. The movements that had once been quick and sure grew slower, more deliberate. His voice, which used to fill a room with energy and enthusiasm, was now often reduced to a quiet whisper. It was difficult to watch such a vibrant man slowly succumb to the effects of aging and illness. Yet, despite these physical challenges, Bernard's spirit remained unwavering. He never complained about his pain or limitations. Instead, he carried on with the same quiet dignity that had always defined him, continuing to bring warmth and joy to those around him. His resilience was a testament to the strength of his character, and it inspired me every day. One cold evening in late November, Bernard invited me to join him for a game of chess. His house, as always, felt like a cozy sanctuary, a place of warmth and comfort. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow across the room, and the air was filled with the soothing scent of pine and the faint, nostalgic aroma of leather-bound books. The chessboard was set up on a small wooden table near the fire, ready for our game. To Bernard and me, this wasn't just a game. It was a cherished tradition, a simple yet meaningful way to spend time together without the distractions of the outside world. Bernard had a deep love for chess, and over the years, I had grown to appreciate it not just for the game itself, but for the quiet connection it allowed us to share. Sitting across from him, I could feel the peace of the moment. Outside, the world was busy and cold, but in that room, time seemed to slow, allowing us to savor the stillness. That night, something about Bernard seemed different. His usual calm demeanor was there, but there was something extra, an unexpected twinkle in his eye, as if a spark of youth had been reignited within him. Perhaps he was remembering a time from long ago, when life had seemed full of endless possibility. It wasn't something he said, but I could sense it in the way he moved his chess pieces, each one placed with the same careful thought. But now with a renewed sense of purpose and excitement. The room was silent, save for the soft clicks of the chess pieces and the occasional crackle from the fire. Bernard didn't speak much during our games, but his presence was enough. He had this remarkable ability to make even silence feel meaningful, as though words weren't necessary to communicate. And in that quiet, I found a deep connection, a connection that transcended age and time, a connection that spoke directly to the heart. As the game continued, I couldn't help but feel a deep admiration for him. Despite the challenges that age and illness had brought, Bernard's quiet strength was still evident in everything he did. That night, as we sat in the glow of the fire, I realized that these simple, unspoken moments were some of the most precious gifts Bernard had ever given me. Midway through our game, Bernard paused. His hand hovered over the chess piece known as the bishop, but he didn't move it. Instead, he looked at me, and in that moment, I felt as though he was looking deep into my soul. It was as if he could see all of me, the good, the bad, the struggles, and the hopes, without a single word being spoken. "Looking at you," he began, his voice softer than usual, tinged with a hint of nostalgia, "reminds me of the days when I first married my wife. She was young, full of life, and so beautiful, just like you are now." His words, though simple, carried a weight that made the room feel heavier. He paused, his eyes drifting down to the chessboard in front of him, but it wasn't the game that held his attention. It was as if he was searching for something in the past, something that no longer existed. His fingers, weathered and trembling slightly, hovered over a piece, but he didn't move it. The board, like the rest of his life, seemed frozen in time. "I miss her, you know," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might break the fragile thread that connected him to the memory. "We had so many wonderful years together. I could tell you stories about her that would make you laugh, that would make you feel like you knew her too. But after she passed, everything changed. The house has been so quiet. There's a kind of loneliness that settles in when someone you love is gone. His eyes, usually sharp and full of life, now looked distant, as though they were seeing something far beyond the walls of his home. I've learned to fill my days with work in the garden. The flowers and the vegetables don't complain. You know, they give me something to do, something to focus on. But still, some nights, I feel the emptiness more than others. It's like the silence becomes too loud, too overwhelming. His words hung in the air for a moment, a weight that neither of us could escape. I looked at him and saw not just the man who had been my friend, but the raw vulnerability beneath his weathered exterior. He was not asking for sympathy, but there was an unmistakable longing in his eyes, a longing for companionship that hadn't faded with time. Finally, his voice broke the silence again, quieter now, almost unsure of itself. Would you be willing to keep me company tonight? Just for a little while? I've been alone for so long, and sometimes it's hard to sleep with all the memories swirling around in my head. It gets harder every year. There was a long pause as I processed what he was asking. First, I didn't fully understand the weight of his request. But then, as his words sank in, I realized that this was not just a casual invitation, it was a deep, heartfelt plea for connection. His life, so full of warmth and generosity, had left him with a quiet longing for something that only another person could provide. He wasn't asking for anything grand, just for someone to sit beside him, to share the silence. I was caught off guard. The request felt immense, almost too much to bear. It was so simple, yet so heavy. My first instinct was to decline. I felt a wave of uncertainty flood over me. How could I say yes to something so intimate, something that felt so unfamiliar? But then, I thought about Bernard. I thought about the many years he had shown me kindness, about all the times he had been there for me, without asking for anything in return. He had always been like a grandfather to me, offering not just wisdom but also a warmth that made me feel safe. Over the years, he had shared his life with me, his joys, his sorrows, his laughter, and his stories. He had never judged me, never asked for anything from me other than my company. He had simply been there, consistently, unconditionally. And now, here he was, asking for something in return, a simple, quiet act of companionship. As I looked into his eyes, I saw the years he had lived, the loss he had suffered. This wasn't about him asking for a favor, it was a plea for connection, for someone to ease the weight of his solitude. I could see that now. He wasn't looking for anything more than a moment of peace, a shared presence that could quiet the storm of memories that haunted him. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my courage. My heart pounded in my chest, but I knew what I had to do. I couldn't turn my back on him now. I had to be there for him, just as he had been there for me. Yes, Bernard, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. I'll help you, because you've always been there for me. I'll be there for you tonight. The words came from a place of deep compassion, a place of understanding that transcended the discomfort I felt. I was nervous, of course. I didn't know what would happen next, how this night would unfold. But deep down, I knew that sometimes, helping someone meant stepping into the unknown, stepping into discomfort. Real love, I realized, wasn't about easy moments. It was about showing up for someone when they needed you the most, even when it felt hard. Bernard's face softened, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a spark of joy in his eyes. His weary expression lifted, replaced by a warmth that filled the room. His smile, once faint, grew into something genuine, something beautiful. It was a smile of gratitude, of relief, and of happiness. We sat together a while longer, talking about simple things, how the weather had been lately, the latest news about the garden. Small talk that felt comforting in its normalcy. But there was an unspoken agreement in our conversation. We didn't need words to understand each other. It was time to move inside, to leave the chessboard behind and embrace the stillness of the night. Once we were in his bedroom, the atmosphere changed. It was quieter, more intimate. The room smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that his wife used to make, a smell that had long been associated with warmth and comfort. It felt like a sanctuary, a place of peace and familiarity. The bed was neatly made, with an old quilt that had seen many years of love and care. Bernard sat down first, patting the space beside him. I joined him, and for a moment, we just sat there, sharing the silence. Time seemed to slow down, giving us the gift of being present together. He reached out slowly, placing his hand gently on my knee. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was tender, thoughtful, and respectful. He moved closer with care, not with urgency, but with the quiet need for connection. There was nothing overwhelming about the moment. It was simply two people, sharing space in a way that made them feel less alone. In that moment, the room was filled with peace, with warmth, and with an unspoken understanding. It wasn't about anything grand or extraordinary. It was about comfort, about the shared presence of two people who had found solace in each other's company. There were no labels, no definitions. It wasn't about what we had or hadn't done in the past. It was about the here and now. It was about being present for one another in a way that transcended the typical expectations of relationships. As the night unfolded, I realized that this was a bond that went beyond simple companionship. It wasn't about fulfilling a need or a desire. It was about shared humanity, about understanding the silent suffering that comes with loneliness and offering a piece of yourself in return. It was a bond that didn't need words, because the connection we shared was understood in the silence between us. We didn't need to explain anything. In the quiet of that room, with Bernard's hand resting gently on my knee, we shared something deeper than either of us could fully articulate. It was a moment of profound connection, a bond that transcended age, expectation, and all the complexities of life. In that moment, we were simply two souls who had found a rare kind of peace in each other's company, a peace that spoke more clearly than any words could ever do. As the fire in the hearth crackled, sending a warm glow that flickered across the walls and softened the edges of the room, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and fulfillment. It was a tranquility that I hadn't anticipated, a serenity so profound it seemed to wash over me entirely. The night, seemingly simple and quiet at first glance, had blossomed into something far more significant, a moment of deep, unspoken connection that would become one of the most cherished memories of my life. In that shared silence, there was no need for words. We had communicated in a way that transcended time, distance, and all the conventional boundaries that usually define the relationships between people. That night, we had become more than family. We had become two souls who, for a brief yet eternal moment, met in a space where love was untainted by expectations or the limits of language. It was pure, unfiltered, and shared between us in the simplest of ways. There were no grand gestures, no elaborate displays of affection, just the quiet, mutual understanding that passed between us, the kind of connection that is felt deeply, even when no words are spoken. A few years later, Bernard, the person with whom I had shared this unforgettable experience, passed away. His absence left a quiet, almost imperceptible emptiness in my life. Yet, despite his physical absence, the memory of that night remained with me, embedded in my heart like a treasure that could never be taken away. In the years that followed, I often found myself revisiting that evening in my mind, reflecting on the emotions it had stirred within me, trying to make sense of the inexplicable depth of our connection. What struck me, upon reflection, was that the significance of that night did not lie solely in the physical act or the fleeting moment we shared. It was in the profound bond that had been formed between us, a bond far deeper and more meaningful than I had initially understood. That night was a revelation. It taught me lessons about human connection that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. I came to understand that true connection goes beyond the surface, beyond the words we speak or the gestures we make, and reaches into the silent spaces between hearts, where the truest understanding resides. It was in those quiet, seemingly insignificant moments that the deepest bonds are often formed, when we share nothing more than a glance, a gesture, or even a silence. and yet something profound passes between us. We often don't recognize it when it happens, but the most powerful relationships in our lives are frequently not built on dramatic displays or monumental events. They are forged in the subtler, quieter moments when two people are simply present for one another, when empathy and understanding flow without need for explanation. What impacted me the most was the realization of love's true nature, its boundless, adaptable form. Love, I had always believed, was something confined to romantic relationships or the idealized notions of affection we often see portrayed in movies and books. But through Bernard's kindness and our shared experiences, I learned that love is far more expansive than I had imagined. It exists in the quiet, intimate exchanges between people, those moments when we don't need words to convey our feelings, when we are simply there for each other, providing comfort in times of need. Love, I learned, is not a singular emotion. It is fluid, limitless, and capable of taking on many forms. Even after Bernard's passing, the lessons he imparted on me, lessons about patience, empathy, and the quiet power of love, continued to shape my life in ways I never anticipated. The memory of that night, the wisdom it left behind, remained a constant guide for me as I navigated the complexities of life. It was a moment of clarity, a turning point that expanded my understanding of what it truly means to connect with another human being. I will forever be grateful for that shared experience, for the way it changed me, and for the profound lesson it taught me that sometimes the most meaningful connections arise in the quietest, most unexpected places. In his will, Bernard left me his beloved chess set. To an outsider, it might have seemed like nothing more than a finely crafted collection of pieces and a well-worn board. But to me, it was a gift imbued with far more significance. It was not merely an object, it was a symbol of our time together, of the countless games we had played, and the countless conversations we had shared in the stillness of those nights. Each piece, each move, carried with it a memory, a lesson, and a shared experience that only Bernard and I had known. Every time I sit down to play with that chess set, I feel Bernard's presence as if he's sitting right beside me. It's no longer just about the game or the strategy. It's about the deeper connection we had, the lessons he taught me without ever speaking a word. He showed me that life, much like chess, is full of strategy, unexpected turns, and moments of uncertainty. But no matter how difficult or unclear the path may seem, there is always a way forward, a move to be made, and a lesson to be learned. More than that, Bernard taught me about love, not the romantic, fleeting kind, but the quiet, enduring love that exists in the spaces between two people who truly understand each other. He showed me that real connection doesn't require grand declarations or dramatic expressions of affection. Sometimes, the greatest acts of love are the simplest ones, being there for someone when they need it, offering kindness without expectation, and quietly sharing a moment of understanding. It was in these silent, unspoken moments, whether during a game of chess, a shared cup of tea, or a gentle conversation, that I learned the most valuable lesson of all. The bonds that define us as family are not always the ones we are born into. Sometimes, they are the ones we build along the way. These connections, often invisible to the outside world, are the ones that truly shape us, that define who we are, and that carry us through the highs and lows of life. Every time I play with Bernard's chess set, I am reminded of the profound connection we shared. It is not just a piece of my past, it is a living symbol of the lessons he imparted and the wisdom he left behind. Those lessons continue to guide me in my relationships, in my approach to life, and in my understanding of what it truly means to be part of a family. The memory of Bernard lives on, not just in the moves of a chess game, but in every act of kindness, in every moment of shared understanding, and in every bond one forms with others. Thank you for taking the time to watch our videos. If you find the content useful and interesting, don't forget to like, share, and especially subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. Our channel will always update attractive, inspiring, and useful content for you. Click the bell icon to receive notifications as soon as there are new videos. Your support is the biggest motivation for us to continue to develop. Thank you and see you in the next videos.